I moved to Maine in the winter of 2019, during one of the coldest Februaries the coast had seen in decades. The air carried salt and snow together, and the streets of the small town called Port Briar were almost deserted. I had left Boston behind, the noise, the memories, the city that reminded me daily of a life that had crumbled. What I wanted was silence, a place where I could hear my thoughts again. But Maine's silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that made you aware of every creak, every gust of wind scraping against the glass. It was alive in its own cold, unwelcoming way. The house I bought stood at the very edge of town, a two-story relic with paint faded by decades of salt air. Locals called it the Harlow Place, a name that sounded more like a warning than an address. It had been abandoned for nearly 20 years, yet when I saw it, the warped porch, the tilted shutters, the overgrown path, I felt drawn to it. Something about its loneliness mirrored mine. I told myself it just needed care, someone to fill its hollow rooms again. I signed the papers without hesitation, though the realtor had seemed relieved when the deal closed. That first night, the house groaned like a sleeping giant disturbed after a long hibernation. The fireplace crackled weakly, the flames barely holding back the cold that seeped through every wall. I sat on the old couch left behind by whoever lived there before me, sipping black coffee and staring into the staircase that wound up into the dark. Every sound was amplified, the tick of the clock, the shifting wood, the wind forcing its way through unseen cracks. I remember thinking it felt like the house was testing me, waiting to see if I'd last till morning. Over the next few days, I unpacked my boxes, trying to make the place feel like home. I set my writing desk by the sea-facing window where the lighthouse flickered faintly across the bay. The view was mesmerizing. Endless grey waves crashing against the cliffs, gulls crying in the distance, the horizon fading into fog. But some nights, when I glanced out after sunset, I'd swear I saw faint movement in the dunes below, a dark shape, shifting for just a second before disappearing. I told myself it was my imagination, but something about it lingered in my mind long after. At the diner downtown, I met a handful of locals, quiet, polite, the kind who didn't say more than necessary. When I mentioned where I'd moved in, the room fell silent for a few seconds too long. An older man, Tom Calder, finally spoke. "That house doesn't like being empty," he said softly, "but it doesn't much like company either." His tone was calm, but his eyes looked past me, like he was remembering something he didn't want to. The waitress quickly changed the subject and I laughed awkwardly, pretending I hadn't felt the chill that crept down my spine. That night, the moment I stepped onto my porch, I noticed the upstairs window was open. I was sure I had closed it earlier that day. The curtain inside moved gently, as if something had brushed past it. The air was still. There was no wind. I climbed up, shut it tight, and locked it, convincing myself it was just the draft. But as I turned to leave, I caught a faint reflection in the glass. A shadow standing behind me that vanished when I spun around. The hallway behind me was empty, but the feeling of being watched clung to me all the way downstairs. The next morning, the snow had settled in a thin layer over the porch. I stepped outside to find footprints leading right up to my front door, single prints, deep and deliberate. There were no prints leading away. My breath fogged in the air as I followed them, but they stopped exactly at the threshold. I checked the locks, the windows, even the attic. Everything was secure. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was probably the mailman or a curious neighbor. But the nearest house was nearly half a mile away and no one had come by since I'd moved in. That evening, I sat at my desk, writing, the fire behind me struggling against the cold. The sound came suddenly, soft, rhythmic footsteps from the floor above. I froze, listening, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. 1, 2, then silence. I waited, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Finally, I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The upstairs hallway was empty, every door closed. The air smelled faintly of sea salt and something older, damp wood and time. When I returned to my desk, the coffee beside me had gone cold. By the third week, I started noticing small changes. Doors left ajar that I was sure I'd closed, lights flickering once before going dark. A chair slightly turned from its place. The air in certain rooms felt colder, heavier, like the house was holding its breath. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was just age and imagination. But some nights, I'd wake up to a faint whispering, as though two voices spoke somewhere in the house. Low, calm, impossible to understand. I once tried to record it on my phone, but the playback captured nothing except the steady hum of the heater. Then came the night I woke to find the basement door open. I'd never gone down there. It always smelled of damp earth and something metallic like rust or blood. The door creaked wider as I stared, as if acknowledging my fear. Slowly, I stepped toward it and pushed it shut, sliding the old iron latch into place. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The latch was fixed on the outside of the door. Whoever had built it hadn't been keeping people out of the basement. They'd been keeping something inside. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that latch. Why would anyone seal a basement from the outside? I tried to distract myself with work, with long drives through the snow-covered roads of Port Briar, but every time I came home, the air felt thicker, heavier somehow. I started leaving lights on at night, the soft yellow glow spilling across the floorboards like a fragile safety net. Yet every morning I'd find one bulb burnt out, as if the house was slowly swallowing the light. The silence began to feel almost intelligent, patient, listening. One night after a storm knocked out the power, I lit a few candles and sat by the fire, the wind howling outside. I don't know why, but I felt pulled toward the basement door again. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe exhaustion from pretending not to care. The latch was cold beneath my fingers, colder than the air around it. I hesitated, then lifted it slowly. The door opened with a deep, aching groan. A stale, earthy smell rose up, thick and heavy. I pointed my flashlight into the dark stairwell, but the beam seemed to dissolve before reaching the bottom. The stairs creaked as I descended, each step echoing in the narrow space. My breath came out in small clouds. The walls were made of stone, slick with moisture. When I reached the bottom, I realized the basement wasn't empty. Against the far wall stood old furniture, covered in white sheets. Beneath one of them, something moved. A small, deliberate shift, like breathing. I froze, light trembling in my hand. "Hello?" My voice cracked as it left my throat. No answer. Only the faint sound of water dripping somewhere in the dark. I stepped closer, my flashlight shaking as I reached out to pull the sheet away. But before I touched it, the fabric rippled, as if brushed by an unseen hand, and then went still again. My heart hammered. I backed away slowly, keeping the light fixed on the sheet. The moment I turned toward the stairs, I heard it. A whisper, soft and close, coming from the dark behind me. It wasn't English. It wasn't even clear enough to be words. It was more like breathtaking shape. I ran, stumbling up the steps, slamming the door, and locking it tight. After that night, the house changed. The temperature dropped even when the heater ran all day. I'd find handprints on the windows from the inside, small, pale smudges, as though someone had pressed their fingers against the glass while watching the sea. Sometimes I'd wake up with the faint sound of footsteps pacing the hallway outside my room. The boards would creak, pause, then move again, closer each time. I stopped sleeping properly. The town felt safer than my own home. Even the diner with its silent stairs and bad coffee was a relief. One afternoon I went to see Tom Calder again. He was sitting in his truck near the docks, smoking. When I asked if he knew what had happened at the Harlow Place, He looked at me for a long time before speaking. "Used to be a family there," he said quietly. "The Harlows, husband, wife, little boy. They came up from Portland in the 70s. One winter the father went missing. They searched for weeks, found him in the basement, or what was left of him." He didn't elaborate. He just flicked his cigarette into the snow and drove away without another word. That night, I couldn't resist. I had to see the basement again. The story gnawed at me. What had he meant? What was left of him? I waited until midnight when the house was still, the sea roaring faintly beyond the cliffs. With a flashlight in one hand and the latch trembling in the other, I opened the basement door. The air hit me like a wall, damp and cold. I descended again, heart pounding. This time the white sheets were gone. The furniture was bare, and on the far wall, carved deep into the stone, were letters, faint but unmistakable. "Help us." The letters looked old, scratched in desperation. My fingers traced them, the edges rough and uneven. Then I noticed something else, a narrow crack running down the wall beside the words. I pressed my ear against it. There was a sound, faint, rhythmic, breathing. I stumbled back, the light shaking wildly. I turned to run, but a loud bang echoed from above. The basement door had slammed shut. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then went out. The darkness that followed wasn't empty. I could feel it, something standing just beyond my reach, waiting. When I woke, I was on the floor of my living room. The fire had gone out. My head ached like I'd been hit. The door to the basement stood open again, the air seeping from it like mist. I packed my things that morning, my hands shaking so badly I could barely close the suitcase. As I stepped outside, the dawn light was thin and gray. The sea looked endless, the cliffs quiet. I didn't look back when I started the car, but in the rearview mirror I saw movement in the upstairs window. The curtain shifting slightly, as if someone was watching me leave. I never went back to Port Briar. I sold the house to a distant buyer through an agent, never speaking to them directly. But sometimes, especially on cold nights, I dream of the sound from that basement. The slow, steady breathing that matched my own. I wake to find the air in my apartment heavy, the faint scent of salt and damp wood lingering near the walls. Once I thought I heard whispering again, far off beneath the hum of the city. I turned on every light I could find, but for a long moment the shadows didn't move.